because I want to go through our next type of tissue, which is called connective tissue. And remember, when we're talking about connective tissue, we are talking about some type of living cells that happen to be surrounded by a non-living matrix. And depending on the type of connective tissue determines the type of living cell and the type of non-living matrix that's around it. Loose connective tissue is an example of connective tissue. Dense connective tissue is an example of connective tissue. Cartilage is an example of connective tissue. Bone is an example of connective tissue. Blood is an example of connective tissue. And so let's dive into the first type, loose connective tissue. The non-living matrix of loose connective tissue is collagen, which is a protein, really strong. It also is flexible. You can see the collagen as the pink strands in that loose connective tissue. And then elastin, which is another protein. It's much smaller, thinner. It's this purple looking strand here, very strong and very flexible. Think of inelastic. And we find loose connective tissue around under our skin, which is the dermis of our skin, and then around our nerves and blood vessels. Excuse me, one second. So think of collagen almost like a rope, and then elastin like a rubber band here. So this rubber band can stretch quite a bit, but then when I release the pressure, it goes back to its original size. It can stretch quite a bit, and then it goes back to its original size. So underneath our skin, we have a lot of collagen and we have a lot of elastin. And this is what allows our skin to go back to its original shape when somebody pushes on it. So if you push on the side of your face, it's going to bounce back to its original shape because that skin has these elastin fibers and they basically go back to their normal shape. Now, as we get older, we make less collagen and we make less elastin. So the skin starts to sag a little bit because the collagen can't hold it in place. And then it also doesn't move back as quick as it used to because the elastin is also weaker inside of the skin. It's one of the reasons why when you're young, little baby has like really flexible skin, no wrinkles whatsoever. But as you get older, you start getting little wrinkles because as these skin cells replace themselves, the tissue around it, the matrix in that dermis layer of your skin creates less and less collagen, less and less elastin. And so you look older. Your skin loses that elastic quality to it. A little bit of its strength too. I know I had a great aunt who lived to 98, which is pretty old considering humans 100 years ago didn't live past 40. So that's pretty old. She lived to 98 and her skin had lost so much collagen and elastin that if you grab the arm too hard, skin would actually pull apart. It got real bad, so she had to wear stuff over her arms. And that's simply because as you get older, these two proteins that are in that non-living matrix of our skin, the loose connective tissue, it gets weaker. And it gets weaker. Every time it replaces itself, it gets weaker and weaker and weaker until you're 98, 100 years old, and your skin's just barely holding on. And of course it hurts, so she had to be really careful. There's another type of connective tissue. This stuff is really tough. This is dense connective tissue. Yes, you write this stuff down, Will. Yes, Ramiro, the dogs again. You know what? I think they just like you guys. It's 6th period. I mean, it must be what it is. They want to make sure you hear them. I left my door open here. Maybe one of them will come in and say hello. So dense connective tissue is another type of connective tissue. And its non-living matrix, so it just says matrix, is parallel collagen fibers. I'm going to actually add one thing in here. Sorry, guys. I meant to do this last year. So it's parallel collagen fibers and a little elastin, just a little bit. Ah, shoot. Sorry, guys. Bear with me. Bear with me. And one more time. There we go. Now, the elastin, remember, is the elastic material, the elastic protein. So it's very similar to loose connective tissue. The big difference is it has a lot more collagen, and the collagen you can see lined up next to each other if you look at dense connective tissue under a microscope. It's really tough. So it's like all these strands of rope next to each other. Now it's flexible, but it's tough. I imagine you had like a clump of rope together. It'd be flexible, but it would be tough. No, it's supposed. I think it's supposed to be B. The last one, loose connective tissue, was A, right? Unless, let me double check. Yeah, loose connective tissue is A. B is dense connective tissue. It's okay. I'm glad you asked for clarification. Now, the location of dense connective tissue is our ligaments and our tendons. So in between our bones, this bone and this bone is held together by dense connective tissue. We call those ligaments. Muscle attaches to bone in order to move the bone. So when you have muscle attached to bone, it's also dense connective tissue because it has to be tough, it has to be strong, but we call those tendons. Same material, ligaments and tendons, it's just what they're attached to. So bone to bone is ligaments, muscle to bone is a tendon. And if you've ever eaten a chicken wing before, if you ever had like barbecue wings and you're chewing on the end of the meat, that of course is a chicken arm that you're eating or a chicken leg that you're eating. And you'll notice that chewy white fiber. So you can still eat it, but it's chewier than the meat. That's the ligaments. That's the tendons. That's the dense connective tissue. So the dense connective tissue is strong. It holds our bones together. It doesn't allow me to pull these bones apart. That would be really bad, right? It doesn't allow me to move the bone, the arm in the wrong way. It keeps these bones from going hyperextending in the wrong direction. It also allows the muscles to grab onto the bone and be able to do work without, tearing itself from the bone, which it can happen if you try to lift too much weight, but they're not perfectly strong. They're not indestructible, but they're incredibly strong. So we have loose connective tissue that we've covered so far. We have dense connective tissue. They both look very different under the microscope, which you guys will find. Another type of connective tissue is blood. So blood you may not think of as connective tissue, but it connects things. It also provides support. Think of an erection. The erection is when the penis is hardened. That is getting hard because of blood. So it acts just like a connective tissue. Blood also connects different parts of our bodies. And so we classify it as a connective tissue, even though it doesn't really fall into the same, that doesn't look the same as the other types of connective tissue. So living cells in the blood are red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. You can see the red blood cells here, red blood cells, red blood cells. You can see different white blood cells, and we'll learn about all of these different white blood cells and what they do. These are all white blood cells. This right here, this little guy is a platelet. And we'll talk about what all these things do when we get to blood. The non-living part of blood is mostly water. We call it plasma. And if you're thinking about, you've heard that word before, you may have heard that word before, especially around coronavirus treatments. There's a treatment that they use in the hospitals for people who have COVID-19. They get plasma from people who were infected with COVID-19 but have recovered. So they have these proteins floating around in their blood that are able to recognize the coronavirus and grab onto it and hold onto the coronavirus so that your white blood cells can then engulf the virus and get rid of it. These are called antibodies. And so what they do, people who've had COVID-19 are asked to donate their blood so that they can have the water removed, the plasma removed. And in that plasma, you have all these proteins floating around. One of the proteins happens to be an anti-COVID-19 antibody. And so they give the plasma to someone else. So it doesn't have any white blood cells, doesn't have any red blood cells, doesn't have any platelets anymore. It's just the liquid. And then it helps people who are really sick to fight off the infection because it grabs, those proteins grab onto the virus as it's floating around the blood and allows their immune system to kill the virus. It's a little side note. You probably, maybe have heard of the blood plasma treatment before, maybe not. Bone is also considered a connective tissue. Now, in the bone, we have living cells, which we call osteocytes. They're hard to spot. These are not the living cells. The living cells are actually these dark little images here. And those living cells create the hard bones that we're familiar with, all of the non-living matrix that makes bones really tough, flexible, and rigid at the same time. So calcium is a mineral. We get it from milk, we get it from certain green leafy vegetables. And when these osteocytes are creating bone around themselves, they use calcium and phosphorus, which is another mineral, to make a really hard substance. And then they build in a circular pattern. So they basically build around all of these living cells here. And they actually build in a concentric circle too, leaving some spaces for blood vessels to travel through, because these cells still need to get nutrition. They still need to get energy from our blood. So we got to get blood going through those bones. So there's a living part of bone, and then there's a non-living part of bone because it's a connective tissue. And look at this protein, collagen again. It's that rope-like protein. So your bones have that strong rope-like protein in addition to these hard minerals. So what that does is it creates this hard bone. And I got to get my models from my classroom. I don't know why I forgot to grab those when I was there this summer. But those bones are flexible because of the collagen inside of the bone. It creates a bone that can give just a little bit without snapping. If we didn't have this protein collagen in our bone, and we put a bone under an enormous amount of weight, let's say we were trying to do a squat, the bones would just snap if it was too much weight. And we don't want our bones to snap. It would be incredibly painful, and I mean, we could die if we were out in the wild. So we want our bones to bend a little bit. Not too much though. We want them to bend just a little bit under pressure. Let me know if I'm going too fast. Another type of connective tissue is known as cartilage. This is a very particular type of cartilage. There's actually a couple different types of cartilage we're going to talk about. And it's very smooth, has a slick feel to it. And as soon as we can get in class, I'll have you guys feel some cartilage. And it's tough. We find cartilage in a couple different places in the body, depending on what type of cartilage it is. So letter E is cartilage. I need to clean up these notes. The living cells in cartilage are known as chondrocytes, and they're surrounded by a non-living matrix of, oh, look at those two proteins again, collagen and elastin. In cartilage, the collagen and elastin are mixed together. So they create a different look than those long strands of collagen and elastin we see in loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. And that creates 3 types of cartilage. One type of cartilage, the one you just saw a microscope image of, is known as hyaline cartilage. Please repeat after me. You don't have to take your microphone off mute. Just repeat after me. Hyaline cartilage. So try it. Hyaline cartilage. Now, hyaline cartilage connects our ribs to our sternum. Pretty much the only place we find it. So our ribs to the sternum right here. And it creates some flexibility. So our ribs can expand and contract without bone scratching against bone. It also is found between any 2 bones that rub against each other. So right here, between this bone and this bone, there's hyaline cartilage. Imagine 2 bones rubbing up against each other all the time. That bone on bone would literally wear the calcium phosphorus matrix down over time. But if you put cartilage in the middle, and that cartilage is tough, it's flexible, but smooth, it allows those bones to travel freely over each other. And we have hyaline cartilage between all of our bones, not just ribs and sternum, but it covers the ends of all of our bones. And so if you're in a sport or you've had some type of injury to cartilage, like in your knee or your shoulder, you know somebody that's had an injury like that, basically what's happened is the hyaline cartilage has torn, or it's worn itself out. So the bones have had so much pressure going back and forth over time that that cartilage wears down or it tears. And then you have a problem where you have bone against bone, and it can be painful anytime that person has movement. So if you have damage to cartilage in your knees, well, every time that person is going to walk, it's going to hurt. They're probably going to wake up and have sore knees. Then every time they try to walk, it's going to hurt, like bone grinding against bone. Same thing can happen in your shoulder. Same thing can happen in your hands. It can happen anywhere where you have bone against bone. There's another type of cartilage, which we call elastic cartilage. And we're almost done for the day with notes, guys. Just hang in there. Elastic cartilage. And we find elastic cartilage here. So the shape of our ears are made from elastic cartilage. This is just skin and fat. Here, though, there's cartilage. We also find elastic cartilage in our vocal cords. So inside of our voice box, and I'm going to show you guys a cool video where you get to see the vocal cords in just a sec. We have voice cords, almost just like the strings of a violin or a guitar or something. They're inside of our voice box, and they're made of this cartilage, elastic cartilage, which allows them to be flexible and allows them to vibrate when we need to make sounds. If you've ever just taken your ear and kind of moved it back and forth, you can see how flexible that elastic cartilage is. It doesn't lose its shape though. Your ear is going to always keep that shape, but it can move around a little bit. And some ears are harder than others. Some people's ears are super soft. So just depending on your genetics determines how elasticy your elastic cartilage is. Then there's a third type of cartilage. And this cartilage we only see in the spine. And we call it fibrocartilage. It's super tough. And it can maintain a lot of pressure without having any issues. Our spine has to keep our body upright. It holds all of the weight from our head and the rest of our body. And in between each one of the vertebrae, I wish I had my guy up in front here. It contains each one of the vertebrae. In between the vertebrae, there's a little bit of cartilage, which we call a disc, basically. That disc is made of fibrocartilage. Okay, once everybody's done with these notes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some elastic cartilage up close. And this elastic cartilage happens to be in an opera singer's voice box. Now the voice box is right here. In men, you can see where the voice box is because they're bigger than in women. That is what gives men a deeper voice than women, a bigger voice box. Testosterone specifically is a hormone that men make more of, and testosterone causes the voice box to get bigger at a certain point in adolescence. So you can see where the voice box is if you look at someone's Adam's apple. Women have a voice box too, obviously. It's just you have to kind of feel the neck for the tip of it. We call this an Adam's apple because you really only see it with men. Unless a woman has a very deep voice, which is possible, then you probably won't be able to see that Adam's apple. But that's the voice box right here. But now if you want to look at the vocal cords, you have to look through and down the throat. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch a video where somebody takes a scope, a big long camera with a light, down into right on top of the voice box. And we're going to see an opera singer sing so that we can see what those vocal cords are doing, what that elastic cartilage looks like, and how elasticy it actually is. So let's watch this. The music
Transnasal fiber optic stroboscopy. Produced by Dr. Christopher Chang with Fokker Ear, Nose, and Throat Consultants. Here I have a patient ready to undergo the exam. Let's take a closer look. Here we are in the nasal cavity. In the back of the nose, I will have the patient undergo several speech tasks. Say pa, pa, pa. Pa, 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 pa. Say shh.
Okay, so we're not actually at the vocal cords yet. We're just at the back of the throat in this lady. And so you can see her tongue moving as she's trying to make these different sounds.
Say baby bottle.
Baby bottle.
The endoscope will now be threaded further down in order to visualize the vocal cords. The patient will now perform a glide.
So now you can see the vocal cords. So this is the voice box right here. Right above it is a little flap. It's called the epiglottis. It closes when you drink or eat so that food and drinks don't go down into your air pipe. But when you're talking or breathing, the epiglottis opens up and it exposes the voice box. And you can see, here's the elastic cartilage right here. Here's the elastic cartilage. You can't really tell what it's doing because it's moving so fast. You'll see in a moment where he gets a strobe light so that we can actually slow down the vibrations so we can actually see what's happening. And you'll see how much stress this elastic cartilage actually goes through. What is this? That's okay, Antonio. Yeah, there are some similarities in the body. What the H word? All right, let's do it.
The stroboscopy light will now be turned on.
So you can see when she's trying to make a high-pitched sound, the voice box closes and it brings those vocal cords close together. And that elastic cartilage is vibrating super fast. The only way we can see it is if you put a strobe light there at a certain frequency. It allows you to watch those elastic cartilage vocal cords move. But they're moving so fast and they're beating against each other super fast. So they do that anytime you have a high-pitched sound, or if you have a low-pitched sound, the voice box opens up, and then the vocal cords are still vibrating though.
The endoscope will now be removed carefully.
I've done my work if you were grossed out. Good. Guys, just think about that. That's your voice box making sound. I'm sorry that's making you uncomfortable. Why does it sound like a whale or something? I think she was just trying to make certain sounds so that we could see the voice box. But that was somebody trying to sing, an opera singer who obviously knows how to sing. So the purpose of that was so that you could see their voice box in action. So when you talk, your voice box is constantly going bigger, smaller, depending on what sound you're trying to make. Remember, bigger for lower sounds, smaller for higher pitch sounds. And you can see the elastic cartilage is moving closer or further apart depending on the pitch. And we just do that automatically because our brains control all of that without us really thinking about it. But the elastic cartilage is able to withstand all of that banging and movement over and over and over again without having any issues. I'm glad you're feeling better now, Ramiro.